All right, so Steven Crowder is back in the news once again. His former employee, Not Gay Jared, is speaking out against him, and it's not looking good. Like, if you remember everything that happened last year with Steven, it was already pretty bad. You know, he announced him and his wife were getting divorced, and then that tape of him arguing with his wife was leaked, where he was just acting like a man-child. Like, she wanted to use the car, and for some reason they only have one car, even though Steven's worth a ton of money. And he wouldn't let her use it because he'd feel too boxed in. So he told his pregnant wife to take an Uber.
Right?
It's not correct, Steven.
Get an Uber.
Okay, Steven, I can't.
Feeling some constraints?
Steven.
Like, I can't
Steven.
go. Listen to me. You want to walk out right now? Listen to me. I can't go to the gym. I can't go to my parents. I can't call my friends. I can't be home. You're going to take the car and leave me here. Hillary, just think of how boxed in you've made me.
What do you need me to pick up? I'll get it. I'll be back when I'm back.
No, that doesn't work either. You'll be back when you're back. That doesn't work either.
And then also around this time last year, some of Steven's former employees started to speak out about how bad it was working for him. Like his former co-host, Dave Landau, who had left the show, I think, right before all this stuff happened with Steven and his wife. But it sounds like he had a pretty bad experience working for Steven, and he talked about it on a podcast afterwards. And he said once he told him he was quitting, Steven just flipped out at him.
Do you still want to be on Louder with Crowder? And I said, not at the moment. And he starts going off on me. And now there's a ton of people in my apartment who can hear it.
Wait, like he's literally raising his voice?
He's screaming at me.
Okay, so literally raising his voice, not just being stern, like to the point where it's audible.
It's audible, yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, it's started stern, but then it got into telling me that he owns me. And
also, some anonymous employees spoke out and said it was a toxic workplace, and Steven was always really angry. And they also claimed he would expose himself to people that work there. And one time, he teabagged and Not Gay Jared's shoulder while he was sleeping. And also during all this, Owen Benjamin, who used to be friends with Steven, and they've worked together, he said Steven was always trying to get him to wear degrading and sexual outfits that he was uncomfortable with. But he said he'd go along with it for the bit, and he initially thought they were owning the left by dressing like degenerates. But then he said over time, he realized more and more that they weren't owning anybody, and he just kept being asked to wear weird shit. And he said the only thing Steven is owning is a bunch of dresses and a broken home. It changed my mind. And then also on Louder with Crowder, I believe like right before all this stuff came out, they hired Bryan Callen to replace Dave Landau. And within one of the first few months of him working there, Crowder had him in a cow costume getting spanked by a cowboy.
Give me that milk.
And at the time, I made a video about this and how I thought Steven is humiliating Bryan Callen now. And apparently Bryan's mom watched it, and she was so disturbed by it, she called Bryan crying. So that's how bad it's gotten here with Steven. And I'm not sure if Bryan is still on the show or not. If you guys know if he is, let me know down in the comments. But it definitely wasn't going very well for Bryan. So also during all this last year, people figured that Not Gay Jared would have a lot to say about it, because he had worked for Steven for years, and it seemed like they're really good friends and they're close. But then he randomly just left the show in 2018. And at the time, people thought he left because he just wanted to spend more time with his kid, like he had just become a father and didn't have enough time for the show. And they thought it was an amicable departure. But over time, I think people started to realize that's not how it went down. And then last year, when all this information came out, people were like, all right, yeah, there's definitely something going on there. But they also figured that Not Gay Jared signed an NDA, because I don't think he said anything about all this until recently when he posted this video to Twitter, which I'll get to here in a second. But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor, Ground News. You know, it's hard to trust the media nowadays. You hear me talk about it on the channel, and there's a lot going on in the world, so it's important to get a reliable perspective on things. And with Ground News, it helps you see the bigger picture. Their website and app shows you all the news sources reporting on a story, and if they have political bias, so you can compare coverage and come to your own conclusions. Just take a look at this story about Rogan's new $250 million deal with Spotify. I can see there are more than 100 articles about the deal and get a quick summary of the issue from different perspectives. But down here is where you really see how ridiculous the media can be, because I can compare every headline. Some articles on the left are still calling it controversial and saying he needed Spotify, even though his podcast has been number one on their platform for years. And this one in the center points out that silencing or canceling someone for their mistakes isn't the answer. And some articles on the right are making fun of the people who really thought they could get Joe Rogan canceled. So this just makes it a lot easier to read the news. And if you want to get started today, you can go check it out at groundnews.com/toolazytotry. Plans start at $1 a month. But if you use my link, you'll get 30% off their unlimited access Vantage plan. So make sure you guys go check it out, and thanks again to Ground News for sponsoring this video. So like I said, Jared posted a video to Twitter, and he doesn't name Steven at all in it. He just says a former employer of mine, but obviously everybody knows who he's talking about. So he claims this former employer has been threatening him with lawsuits and cease and desist letters, and he made it sound like it's never going to end, like he's been dealing with it for 6 years, and still he's receiving stuff about it. And he did talk about why he left, and it's what we expected. He said it was a toxic and abusive work environment.
Years ago, I voluntarily left my job after deciding I could no longer put myself or my growing family through the toxic and abusive work environment I had endured for years. This place was and is to this day a workplace rife with sexual misconduct, degeneracy, and aggression. The things I saw, the things done to me, and the things I witnessed my employer do to others were disgusting, shocking, and utterly indefensible. I have the receipts.
And he said when he tried to leave the show, it turned into a giant pain in the ass, and he had to spend a ton of money on lawyer fees because Crowder and his lawyer wanted him to turn over this production equipment that he claims he bought himself, and they also wanted him to turn over his personal Twitter account, and they also wanted him to sign a non-compete agreement so he wouldn't be able to work in media for the next 2 years.
My former employer and his attorney argued I could not work in media anywhere in the world, and most certainly not in the United States for 2 years. They told me my Twitter account, another potential lifeline to future work, which I had owned and been the sole manager of since 2009, was to be turned over to them on the argument that it was somehow their intellectual property now. Presumably to keep me from working even further, my former employer even tried to claim my personal production equipment, gear I had owned for years prior to working there, as company property. After producing every receipt to validate my ownership, a vicious lie that I stole from the company was born and disseminated by my employer, by the way, breaking their side of this bogus mutual non-disparagement agreement.
Yeah, so it sounds like they're really trying to prevent him from working in media again. And Jared said he eventually signed an NDA because he was just running out of money and the legal fees were too much. And he says he thought he got them to change the non-compete agreement so he could work a job that he wanted to. But then I guess that didn't really happen, and he received a cease and desist letter and was terminated.
For a small carve-out in the non-compete clause, which allowed me to freely seek employment using some of my skill sets at another specific company. At least I could feed my family. That provision, however, was a lie. And upon starting my new job at the new said company, I was giving another one of these, a cease and desist, and was promptly unlawfully terminated from that position. I added thousands more to my legal debt trying to fight back. My wife was very pregnant by this time, and without a financial safety net for groceries and a baby crib, much less a legal fund to file a countersuit, I simply had to let it go, trusting God had a plan.
And he claims he's still dealing with legal stuff from them. Like he said recently, they sent him something where they demand he's subject to a deposition, and they also demand he turns over any communication he's made with a dozen of his friends.
My former place of employment, demanding that I be subject to an oral deposition under oath for an unlimited amount of time, where they were free to interrogate me on pretty much any private matter that they chose. Also, in this petition for discovery, they demanded that I turn over documents of all communications with more than a dozen of my friends, an unlimited amount of unnamed persons in any form, and over an unlimited period of time.
Yeah, so I wonder how Steven will respond to this. If he actually makes a response and addresses it, or just takes legal action. It'd probably be the latter. Even though I actually did see his producer or somebody who works for the show said, "You just forced my hand tomorrow, 10 a.m." So maybe he'll address it for Steven. I don't know if we'll see him do it because he probably just won't be able to control himself. He'll probably have a meltdown. If he were to talk about it, I can't imagine he makes things much better. But he might have to address it at some point because I'm sure he's losing some support with this. Like most people have Jared's back. Obviously Candace Owens, she said everything Jared has said is true, and he is one of many people that has been enduring this legal abuse for years. Also, Owen Benjamin, he said, I knew all about this shit while it was happening, and I felt really bad for Jared. And then also another former employee at the show, Quarter Black Garrett, he said, I was kept out of the loop on this intentionally back when this stuff went down. Told me they didn't want me to get hurt. I want to know the truth. And there always are two sides to a story. So maybe Steven or his producer have some evidence or could refute what Jared has to say. But at this point, it's not looking good. There are already a lot of stories of Steven being tough to work with and having a toxic workplace environment. And where there's smoke, there's fire. There are enough stories, there are enough people that can corroborate this. It seems like there's definitely something going on here. And it also makes you think, why is Steven trying so hard to silence Jared? I know people defending Steven are saying NDAs and non-compete agreements are just normal things in business, which for some businesses, sure, but what Steven's doing seems very extreme. Why does he care so much about what Jared's doing? It's been 6 years, and some of his other former employees never signed an NDA. I don't know if they're asked to, but Quarter Black Garrett said he never signed one. Owen Benjamin said he never signed one. I don't think Dave Landau did either. So Steven just seems really paranoid when it comes to Jared. And these two just had a weird relationship. For a while it seemed like they were best friends, maybe even more than best friends. One time they went to this rally, some kind of feminist rally or something, and they dressed up in drag, and then they kissed each other multiple times there.
Legitimately suck. Not gay Jared's a surprisingly good kisser. Not gay Jared's a surprisingly good kisser.
Not gay Jared's a surprisingly good kisser.
Yeah, but remember, they're just doing all this to own the libs. Steven doesn't enjoy that at all. No, I'm kidding. In my opinion, I think Steven just needs to come out of the closet already. Also, he did this segment during his show one time where he talks about his biggest fears, and he was surprisingly really honest, maybe too honest. He mentions how he's scared of his bisexual phase coming back, and he also said he's afraid of having children. And what's crazy is he said he's afraid that that fear could cause damage between him and his wife. And this video is from 5 years ago, so that part aged very well.
I'm afraid, frankly, he used to have a bad temper. I'm afraid of it coming back. I'm afraid of Mr. Hyde rearing his ugly bisexual head. That was a short phase. No, I'm afraid. Afraid of getting angry. Afraid of being too emotional. Afraid of being obsessive. Because of that, I'm afraid of alienating friends, family, people who I care about most. Something I think about a lot. Sometimes with a lot of pressure. Sometimes with a lot of compression comes hypervolatility emotionally, and I'm afraid of pushing people away, especially when you have people who you love who either work with you or in close proximity. I'm afraid of, and this is why you might have seen that there was a pause at U of M. I'm afraid of having children. I'm really afraid of having children. And because of that, something else, I'm afraid of the fact that my fear of having children could cause irreparable damage with a wife who I know deserves them.
Yeah, so it's wild that he'd admit all that and be aware of it, but still let it ruin his life. This guy is just a mess. He has some serious problems he needs to work out, but I doubt that'll ever happen. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see if he responds to what Jared had to say. And if he does, I'm sure I'll cover it, so make sure you guys subscribe. And if you guys want to support Jared, he set up a GoFundMe to help pay for his legal fees. If you're interested, it's at freejaredmonroe.com. And also, if you're interested in any more content from me, make sure to check out my Patreon account. I just posted a new video on there about Candace Owens beefing with this rabbi who is completely out of his mind. He's just embarrassing himself on Twitter, and the whole thing is just wild. So if you want to hear about that, make sure you go check it out. Put a link in the description.